The person who loves you most is the same person who will disappear the moment you need them. And here's what nobody tells you. They're not leaving because they don't care. They're leaving because they do. And that terror, that is the scary truth. So if you've ever loved someone who runs when things get real, or if you are the one who runs, stay with me. Because what I'm about to tell you will change the way you see every relationship you've ever had. Avoidant attachment is not coldness. Let that land for a moment before you rush past it, because most people who have loved an avoidant person have spent years, sometimes decades, interpreting the distance as indifference. They have sat across dinner tables from someone who seemed unreachable. They have lain beside someone in the dark and felt completely alone. They have poured themselves out, waited, hoped, and received what felt like nothing in return. And the conclusion they almost always arrive at is the same one. This person simply does not feel what I feel. This person is cold. This person is empty. This person does not love me the way I love them. But that conclusion, as understandable as it is, as earned as it feels, is wrong. And the truth that replaces it is both more painful and more liberating than the story you have been telling yourself. The avoidant person is not cold. They are afraid. There's a profound and critical difference between those two things. And until you understand that difference in your bones, not just your mind, you will keep misreading the distance as rejection when it is actually protection. To understand this fully, you have to go back. Not to last Tuesday when they shut down during an argument, not to last year when they pulled away right after a moment of extraordinary closeness. You have to go back much further than that. You have to go back to a small child, because that is where this story begins, and that is where it must be understood. Every human being arrives in this world completely dependent, not partially dependent, completely. A child cannot regulate their own emotions, cannot soothe their own nervous system, cannot survive physically or psychologically without another person responding to their needs with consistency and warmth. This is not weakness. This is biology. This is the design. And when that design is honored, when a child reaches and someone comes, when a child cries and someone soothes, when a child feels frightened and someone provides safety, the nervous system learns a lesson that becomes the foundation of all future relationships. It learns that closeness is safe. It learns that needing someone is not dangerous. It learns that vulnerability does not have to end in pain. But not every child receives that. Not because their parents were monsters, more often because their parents were themselves wounded, themselves taught to suppress emotion, themselves raised in homes where tenderness was considered weakness and self-sufficiency was the highest virtue. And so the child who reached and was met with irritation, with dismissal, with silence, or with a parent who was physically present but emotionally unavailable, that child received a completely different lesson. The lesson their nervous system recorded was this: when you show what you need, the connection does not strengthen, it ruptures. When you expose your vulnerability, you do not receive comfort, you receive distance. And so the most intelligent, most adaptive thing that child could do was to stop reaching, to learn to manage alone, to become, as the world would later praise them for being, independent. What nobody tells that child, and what nobody tells the adults who later love them, is that this adaptation comes at an enormous cost. The emotions do not disappear because they are no longer expressed. The need for connection does not dissolve because it is no longer voiced. It all goes underground. It gets buried beneath competence and capability, and a carefully constructed self that does not appear to need anything from anyone. But underground does not mean gone. Underground means pressurized. Underground means it will find another way to surface, usually at the worst possible moment, usually in the form of withdrawal or numbness or an inexplicable urge to sabotage the very relationship that is finally starting to feel like home. This is why the avoidant person in your life is not cold. They feel everything. In many cases, they feel more intensely than people who express emotion freely, because nothing was ever released, nothing was ever witnessed, nothing was ever held by another human being in the way it needed to be. The wall is not made of indifference. It is made of every feeling that was never safe enough to be felt out loud, and that changes everything about how you must approach it. If this is reaching something deep in you, share this with one person who needs to hear it. Follow for more truths that quietly change lives. The next part of this may be the most important thing you hear today. Love and self-protection can coexist in the same person. This is perhaps the most disorienting truth you will ever encounter in a relationship, because everything in our cultural understanding of love tells us that it should dissolve barriers, that it should make people open, that it should be the very force that causes someone to finally let down their guard and surrender to connection. We have been fed this story through every film, every song, every romantic narrative that has shaped our understanding of what love is supposed to do to a person. Love conquers all. Love breaks through. Love is enough. And so, when you love someone deeply, when you offer them your whole self, your patience, your tenderness, your absolute devotion, and they still pull away, still go cold, still create distance, at the precise moment when everything between you is finally becoming real, you do not think the problem is love, you think the problem is you. But here is what that story never prepared you for. There are people walking this earth who love you with everything they have, and who are simultaneously, in the very same moment, terrified of that love. Not terrified of you, terrified of what loving you requires them to do, terrified of what it asks them to feel, terrified of how completely exposed they become when they allow themselves to want someone this much. And because that terror is real, because it lives in the body and not just the mind, because it was wired in long before reason had any power over it, the love and the self-protection do not take turns. They operate at the same time, pulling in opposite directions, creating the push and pull that leaves you dizzy and questioning everything you thought you understood about this person. You need to sit with the weight of that for a moment, because what it means is that when an avoidant person withdraws from you, they are not withdrawing from love. They are withdrawing from the fear that love produces in them. And those are not the same thing, even though they feel identical from where you are standing. From your position, the withdrawal looks like absence. It looks like not caring. It looks like choosing distance over you. But from inside their experience, something entirely different is happening. They are managing an internal alarm system that goes off precisely because the love is real, precisely because you matter to them, precisely because the stakes have become high enough to trigger every protective mechanism their nervous system ever developed. Think about what that means. The deeper you get, the more they feel, the louder that alarm becomes. Closeness is the trigger, not conflict, not failure. Closeness. The moments of greatest tenderness, the evenings when everything between you feels right, the conversations where you finally see each other clearly and are seen in return, those are the moments most likely to send an avoidant person retreating into themselves, because their nervous system has a long memory, and that memory says that this feeling, this specific feeling of being fully known by another person, is the feeling that came right before everything fell apart, right before the need was dismissed, right before the love turned conditional, right before the child learned that wanting this much was a dangerous thing to do. So they protect the love by protecting themselves from it. They keep one foot out of the door, not because they want to leave, but because having an exit feels like the only way to stay without being destroyed. They create emotional distance, not because they feel nothing, but because feeling everything with no armor on is something their entire history has taught them not to survive. And all of this happens below the level of conscious choice. They are not sitting across from you, calculating how much distance to maintain. They are being moved by forces older than your relationship, older than their adult self, older than any decision they have ever made about who they want to be with you. This is not an excuse. Understanding it does not mean accepting treatment that diminishes you, but it is a truth that deserves your full attention, because the moment you stop reading their self-protection as a measure of how much they love you, The moment you stop making their fear into evidence of your inadequacy, something shifts. You stop bleeding from a wound that was never yours to carry. And they, for perhaps the first time, encounter someone who sees through the wall without trying to demolish it, which is the only condition under which they might, slowly and imperfectly, begin to lower it themselves. The push and pull dynamic is unconscious, not manipulative. If you take nothing else from everything being shared here, take that. Hold it close, return to it on the days when the confusion becomes unbearable, on the days when you are sitting alone wondering why the person who looked at you like you were the answer to every question they had ever carried suddenly became unreachable overnight. Because the story your mind will write in that silence, the story pain always writes when it has no other explanation, is that you are being played. That someone who is intelligent, who is capable, who clearly understands what they are doing to you, is doing it deliberately. That the hot and cold, the closeness followed by distance, the moments of profound connection followed by walls going back up, is a strategy, a way of keeping you hooked, a way of maintaining control. And that story, as seductive as it is, as much as it gives you someone to be angry at, is almost never true. What is actually happening operates at a level far beneath strategy, far beneath intention, far beneath anything that could reasonably be called a choice. To understand it, you have to understand something about how the human nervous system works, specifically how it works in people who grew up in environments where emotional safety was inconsistent or absent. Because the nervous system is not neutral. It is not a blank receiver of present moment experience. It is a historian. A deeply committed, highly efficient historian that is constantly scanning the current environment for echoes of past threat. And when it finds them, when something in the present moment rhymes with something that once caused pain, it responds, not after deliberation, not after weighing the options, immediately, automatically, with the full force of every experience that taught it that this particular feeling means danger is coming. For the avoidant person, that feeling is intimacy. That feeling is need. That feeling is the specific warmth that blooms in the chest when someone matters to you more than you planned for them to matter. And when that feeling arrives, when it reaches a certain threshold of intensity, the nervous system does not pause to ask whether this person is safe, whether this relationship is different, whether the present moment deserves to be met with openness rather than retreat. It simply fires. The walls come up. The temperature drops. The person who was present and warm and reaching toward you is suddenly somewhere else entirely, and they may not even be able to tell you where they went or why. This is what makes it so profoundly disorienting to be on the receiving end of it, because you were there for the closeness. You felt it too. You know it was real. You know something genuine passed between you, and now you are standing in front of someone who seems to have no memory of it, or worse, seems to be actively dismantling it, and your pain is real. Your confusion is completely legitimate, but the behavior that caused it was not authored by cruelty. It was authored by a nervous system doing the only thing it knows how to do when the stakes get high enough. It was authored by survival. There is a particular kind of grief in understanding this, because anger is easier. Anger at least gives you somewhere to put the pain. If they are manipulating you, you can leave and feel righteous about it. But if they are not manipulating you, if they are simply a person whose early life left them with a nervous system that experiences love and danger as the same frequency, then the situation asks something far more difficult of you. It asks for compassion alongside your boundaries. It asks you to hold two things simultaneously: the truth that their behavior is not about you, and the equally important truth that you still do not have to absorb the impact of it indefinitely. Because here's the thing about unconscious patterns. Unconscious does not mean unchangeable. It means unexamined. And patterns that have never been brought into the light, never named, never traced back to their origin, will run on repeat indefinitely, not because the person chose to keep them, but because nobody ever helped them see that the alarm going off inside them is responding to a fire that burned out a very long time ago. The house is not on fire anymore, but the alarm never got the message. And until it does, the push and pull will continue, leaving both of you exhausted, both of you longing for something neither of you quite knows how to build yet, but both of you, somewhere underneath all of it, still reaching for each other across the distance that fear keeps recreating between you. Healing requires the avoidant to grieve what was never given. This is the sentence that most people skip over because grief is not a comfortable destination. We live in a world that is deeply structurally uncomfortable with grief. We medicate it, we schedule it, we give it a socially acceptable window and then expect it to be finished. We admire the person who bounces back quickly. We quietly judge the one who cannot seem to move on. And so, when we talk about healing, we almost always reach for the language of building, of adding, of developing new skills, new habits, new ways of communicating. We make it a project of construction because construction feels productive, and productivity is something we understand. But for the avoidant person, before any building can begin, before any new pattern can take root, there is something that must be done that looks nothing like progress. There is something that must be felt that the entire architecture of their personality was specifically designed to prevent them from feeling. And that is the grief of what was never there, not the grief of something lost. That is a different kind of mourning entirely. This is the grief of an absence, the grief of a need that was present from the very beginning, urgent and legitimate and completely human, that was never met. The child who needed to be soothed and was instead told to stop crying. The child who needed to be seen and was instead told to be quiet. The child who reached for warmth and found either nothing or something conditional, something that communicated without words that love had to be earned through smallness, through compliance, through the suppression of every inconvenient feeling they had. That child did not get to grieve the loss of those things in the moment. They were too young, too dependent, too busy surviving to stop and feel the full weight of what was missing. And so they did what the psyche does when feeling is not safe. They buried it, they moved forward, they became the capable, self-contained, apparently unbothered person that the world eventually came to know. But buried grief does not decompose, it does not break down over time and become something harmless. It calcifies, it becomes structure, it becomes the very walls and distances and emotional unavailability that now define how this person moves through every relationship they enter. What looks like a personality trait, what looks like simply who they are, is in enormous part the accumulated weight of everything they were never allowed to feel, and therefore never allowed to release. The coldness is frozen grief. The withdrawal is grief in motion. The inability to receive love fully, to let it land, to trust it completely, is the direct consequence of a heart that learned early that love cannot be counted on, and that hoping for it only ever led to a particular kind of pain. So when we talk about healing, we are talking about going back for that grief, not to wallow in it, not to use it as an identity, not to plant a flag in the wound and live there permanently, but to finally, with whatever support and safety can be found, feel what was never safe to feel then, to let the body acknowledge what the mind learned to bypass. To cry, perhaps for the first time as an adult, not over a specific event, but over a whole texture of childhood that deserved to be different than it was. To say, even if only to oneself in the quietest and most private moment, that it mattered, that the absence mattered, that the child who needed more than they received was not wrong for needing it, was not too much, was not broken, was simply a child in an environment that could not hold them the way they deserved to be held. This is where real change begins, not in the communication techniques, not in the attachment theory workbooks, as useful as those can be. It begins in the moment the avoidant person stops defending against the grief and starts moving toward it, because on the other side of that grief is something they may have never fully experienced, the felt sense deep in the body rather than just understood in the mind, that they are allowed to need, that they are allowed to want, that love is not a trap. That closeness does not have to end in devastation, that they, exactly as they are, with every wound and every wall and every complicated, beautiful, broken piece of them, are worthy of being stayed for. You cannot love an avoidant into healing, but presence and boundaries together create the conditions for it. This is the truth that will save you from the particular exhaustion that comes from loving someone who struggles to receive love, the exhaustion of trying harder, giving more, becoming smaller, becoming larger, adjusting yourself in every conceivable direction in the hope that you will finally find the combination that unlocks them. Because when you love someone, and it is not working, the instinct is always to do more, to be more patient, to be more available, to communicate more clearly, to need less, to need differently, to somehow become the perfect version of a partner that will finally make this person feel safe enough to stay open. And that instinct comes from a good place. It comes from love, but it is aimed at the wrong target, and it will drain you empty before it produces the change you are hoping for. The hard truth is that no amount of love poured from the outside can reach the place inside an avoidant person where the wound actually lives. That place is not accessible through someone else's effort. It is not unlocked by devotion, however genuine. It is not healed by patience, however extraordinary. Because the wound was created in relationship, yes, but it was created at a developmental stage when the nervous system was forming its most foundational beliefs about what the world is and what other people are and what love means. And those beliefs encoded that early, that deep, cannot be overwritten by a loving partner, no matter how consistent or how dedicated that partner chooses to be. What they can be is witnessed. What they can be is slowly, carefully, over enormous amounts of time, and with tremendous amounts of support, examined and renegotiated. But that work belongs entirely to the avoidant person. Nobody else can do it for them. Nobody else can want it for them hard enough to make it happen. This is where so many loving, well-meaning people go wrong. They make it their mission. They read every book, attend every workshop, understand the theory with breathtaking clarity, and then pour all of that knowledge into becoming a better container for someone who has not yet decided to do the internal work that healing actually requires. And in doing so, without meaning to, without realizing it is happening, they lose themselves. They begin organizing their entire emotional life around the rhythms of the avoidant person. They shrink their needs to fit the available space. They swallow their pain to avoid triggering withdrawal. They become so focused on not rocking the boat that they forget they are allowed to want the boat to go somewhere. They forget slowly and then all at once who they were before this relationship became the central project of their existence. And this is precisely where boundaries become not just important, but essential. Not boundaries as punishment. Not boundaries as walls built to match the walls already standing between you. Boundaries as the clearest possible expression of self-respect. Boundaries that say, I love you and I will not disappear myself in the process of loving you. Boundaries that communicate through action rather than words, that you are a person with needs that matter, with limits that are real, with a life that has value independent of whether this relationship works or not. Because paradoxically, that is the most healing thing you can offer an avoidant person. Not more accommodation. Not more tolerance of behavior that diminishes you, but the living proof, demonstrated consistently over time, that a person can hold love and self-respect in the same two hands without one destroying the other. For many avoidant people, this is something they have never witnessed. They grew up watching love either collapse into enmeshment or harden into distance. They never saw the middle ground. They never experienced a relationship where closeness did not require the erasure of one person's needs in favor of another's. And when they encounter it, when they encounter someone who loves them steadily and boundaried, and without performing smallness, something begins to shift at a level deeper than conversation can reach. Not immediately, not dramatically, but genuinely. The nervous system, that ancient historian, begins to collect new evidence, begins to build a new case, begins slowly and tentatively and with enormous resistance from everything it has ever known, to consider the possibility that this time, in this relationship, closeness might not have to cost everything. And that possibility, fragile as it is where healing begins.